December 1898. The American public rejoiced as news of the country's victory in the Spanish-American War arrived across the Atlantic. America had originally entered the Spanish-American War on the side of Cuban rebels, who sought independence from Spain. News of Spanish atrocities committed against native Cubans had incensed the American public, and tensions came to a breaking point when the USS Maine, which had been docked in Cuba's Havana harbor, mysteriously exploded. Newspapers instantly faulted Spain for the incident, and President William McKinley declared war. America's military swiftly dispatched the once mighty Spanish Armada in only 113 days, and proved to the world that the United States was a force to be reckoned with. The country would reap the spoils of war. In France, American diplomats brokered the Treaty of Paris, which formally brought hostilities to an end, and ceded vast Spanish colonial holdings of Cuba, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. As U.S. Ambassador John Hay remarked, "This has been a splendid little war." While the Treaty of Paris ended the Spanish-American War, it instigated a heated debate within the United States Senate and across the nation. Ratifying the Treaty of Paris would mark a crucial turning point in American foreign policy. The former British colonies could now pursue an empire of their own. As Americans argued about the future of the spoils of war, a new overarching question emerged. Should the United States become an imperial power? For some, the answer was clear. Imperialism would be the natural route to prosperity. With the technological advancements brought about by industrialization, American farmers faced surpluses which vastly exceeded domestic demand and hungrily eyed the Spanish territories in search of new markets. Businesses were already heavily invested in Cuba, where sugar companies owned a considerable amount of land and were key players in a $100 million industry. However, the real prize was the Philippines. American capitalists had long dreamed of tapping the fabled markets of China from this convenient stepping stone. The wealth of raw materials obtained from all the colonies would significantly bolster the revenues of American companies. Senator Albert Beveridge of Indiana exalted imperialism. It means new employment and better wages for every laboring man in the Union. It means higher prices for every bushel of wheat and corn, for every pound of butter and meat, for every item that the farmers of this republic produce. It means all this tomorrow, and all this forever, because it means the beginning of the commercial empire of the republic. Beveridge's sentiments were commonly shared amongst business owners and politicians alike, who saw imperialism as a means of bolstering America's national prestige. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, on the floor of the Senate, said, "Suppose we reject the treaty. We are branded as a people incapable of taking rank as one of the greatest world powers." The notion of white supremacy brought by social Darwinism also enhanced this idea, and American intellectuals stressed the need for the Anglo-Saxon race to expand to all corners of the globe. Imperialists emphasized the United States' moral obligations to the people of the Philippines as well. It was part of the white man's burden to protect politically naive and savage Filipinos from anarchy and enlighten them with the word of the Gospels. As Republican Senator Newt Nelson commented, "Providence has given the United States the duty of extending Christian civilization. We come as ministering angels, not despots." Not all Americans shared this rosy perspective of American expansion into Spanish territories. On the other side of the debate, an eclectic coalition of men and women, united by their shared opposition against imperialism, formed the Anti-Imperialist League in 1898. The League publicly denounced the Treaty of Paris on the grounds that it was immoral and violated the fundamental concepts that America was founded upon, ideals such as liberty and autonomy that were outlined in the Declaration of Independence. Some even questioned the constitutionality of annexation. Author Mark Twain, a famous member of the League, was a fierce critic of America's encroachment in the Philippines. "It should be our pleasure and duty to make those people free. I am opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land." Joining Twain in the Anti-Imperialist League were Andrew Carnegie and Samuel Gompers. Carnegie represented a faction of business owners who worried that Filipino workers would demand labor rights and unionize. Gompers championed the concerns of the American Federation of Labor, which feared that the cheap labor in the territories would take American jobs and undercut wages. Together, the members of the Anti-Imperialist League argued that imperialism was inherently incompatible with an American republic. How could America remain united across such distances? Indeed, 8,600 miles separated Washington, D.C. from Manila. But even more significant than distance was the cultural difference between the Filipinos and the American public.
How do you assimilate those people who, within the context of your own racial calculus, can never be assimilated, can never be fully civilized, can never be fully part of you? How can you make them a part of you when they are fundamentally predisposed to being apart from you?
Many white supremacists joined the Anti-Imperialist League specifically to prevent imperialism from dissolving the racial hegemony of the United States. Ironically, these white supremacists found common ground with several black leaders, albeit for very different reasons. W.E.B. Du Bois, a prominent black civil rights activist, opposed American expansion, seeing it as an underhanded ploy to extend the color line and establish Jim Crow laws throughout the world. Finally, the United States Senate readied for the official vote on February 6, 1899. Months of passionate debate and discourse had consumed the American people. For the first time, the country was forced to question its national identity. The public held its breath as the votes were cast, anxiously awaiting an outcome that would determine America's destiny. Finally, the result was announced. The treaty had narrowly been passed, with only one vote to spare. America had become an empire. The consequences of America's imperial desires were immediately felt. Rebels in the Philippines, who had been fighting their own guerrilla war against the Spanish, were outraged to see control of their islands casually handed over to America. The Filipinos took up arms against the new oppressor, the United States. The ensuing conflict marked the first casualties of empire. Almost 7,000 American troops died in the exhausting 15 years of continuous hostilities. Even as the body count mounted, news of American atrocities against Filipino civilians shocked the nation and the world. 25,000 Filipino soldiers died, and 300,000 civilians were killed. The irony was damning. A country that had won its own independence through revolution was now on the other side, brutally suppressing a similar movement.
The U.S. public is very resistant to speak of the U.S. as an empire. You know, and it is in this sort of resistance that these wars have always been understood as a little thing.
Although Cuba had escaped direct annexation, U.S. diplomats pursued a similarly aggressive agenda and forced the Cuban government to adopt the Platt Amendment, making Cuba a U.S. colony in all but name. The diplomatic precedent of American intervention set by events in Cuba and the Philippines would be followed throughout most of the earlier 20th century. Under the Roosevelt administration, the United States adhered to a policy of big stick diplomacy, in which the nation relied on direct military intervention to protect its vested interests in Latin America. While Franklin Roosevelt terminated big stick diplomacy and replaced it with the much more cooperative good neighbor policy, traces of this imperialistic mindset still arise in modern American foreign policy. In the aftermath of the Wars of 1898, the United States stood at a crossroads, forced to choose between upholding the nation's fundamental principles of self-determination and democracy, and rising to the world stage as its newest imperial power. In the final analysis, the success of American imperialism is incredibly subjective. Indeed, how does one measure the success of an empire? Economic prosperity or social justice? Adherence to democratic principle or international prestige? The successes of the American empire are clear. With the fortuitous acquisition of the Philippines, Guam, and Puerto Rico, the United States had established itself as a world imperial power and opened up new markets for the bounty of American industry. American colonialism had brought multiple improvements to the territories that had fallen under its care: better infrastructure, advanced medical care, and improved educational quality. But the failures of American imperialism are equally as evident. The decision to become an empire raised questions about the integrity of the United States' founding principles. How could America call itself the champion of democracy and liberty when it subjugated colonies to its rule? The nation had originally entered the war in response to Spanish brutality. The subsequent war in the Philippines pushed America to commit similar atrocities. Indeed, as Spain ceded its colonies, America ceded its moral high ground. Ultimately, it is difficult to determine whether the American experiment in empire was a failure or a success. But regardless of how American imperialism is evaluated, its consequences have left a lasting impact on the American identity.